Welcome to Sakshi TV's special immigration show with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy from Law Offices of Prashanthi Reddy PLLC. Please note that Sakshi TV now has 3 immigration shows every week. On Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy in English, on Thursday at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Chand Parvatnini, and on Friday with attorney Bhanu Lidra at 6 p.m. EST. Please tune in to ask your questions. If you're an immigration attorney and would like to join our special shows, please email us at usa@sakshi.com or call 866-725-7441. Before we begin the show, please note that the information provided on this show is not a legal advice and is for general informational purposes only. Sakshi TV or its agents will not be responsible for use of information. If you need specific legal advice, please contact the attorney directly. Ms. Prashanthi needs no introduction, but if you need consultation, please log on to readyesq.com for contact information. And when you connect with them, don't forget to mention Sakshi TV. From the beginning, readyesq.com has put a wealth of free information and online tools in the hands of the immigrant community and for the benefit of US employers. The readyesq.com site provides latest and cutting edge information on US policies explained in terms you don't have to be a lawyer to understand. Today's topic is the updates from Labor Department, Consulates, and USCIS. We're continuing the last week's topic. And we will continue this knowledge session along with the news and updates on latest immigration, followed by Q&A. Before we get into this topic, you can call us on the numbers displayed on the screen for questions related to immigration and also ask for tips. Hi, Ms. Reddy, how are you doing?
Hi, good, Tony. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So, do you want to start right away with the topic, Ms. Reddy?
Yes, so we can continue what we were discussing last time. Last time we discussed USCIS updates and we discussed CBP updates. Today I wanted to discuss some updates that we have from the Labor Department, the DOL, which is basically connected to PERM. Green card. So that's the first stage of filing a green card is for most people is the labor cert. So in the labor cert stage, you file an application with the Labor Department. It's an online application. And you place advertisements. The employer places advertisements for that particular position. And if they don't get any responses or they get responses that don't qualify, then they're allowed to go ahead. They're supposed to test the market first through those advertisements, and then they will go ahead and file, they're allowed to file the PERM. And sometimes there might be an audit where they ask them for proof of all the ads filed and whether there were any responses. So everything has to be documented. So that's the labor cert process. And that is dealt with by DOL. And so we have some updates from them. Also, we have some updates from with reference to new legislature, if there's any possibility of anything happening in the future with reference to immigration reform and what Biden's policies have been, generally what changes he's made since the, some recent changes that he's made with reference to immigration. So,
Right. Looks like we have a lot of topics to cover today, which is very, very interesting. Would you want to start off with the Department of Labor, Ms. Reddy?
Yes. So the Department of Labor has confirmed that they are also using remote work. So they are using employees who they're allowing them to work remotely. I think most of their employees are now working remotely, and they've, as a result of that, saved about $500,000 from not having to have all that extra office space that they used to have. Also, there's less mail with all the online submissions, so they've embraced technology, and most of the DOL submissions are online. Also, by going remote, they have attracted and been able to harness, those employees that would not have otherwise come and worked for them because it's remote. That's an attractive opportunity. A lot of employees, qualified employees, would want to work remotely. So that's the first update that they gave us. And then The second update is that, which we already know, is that they are not fee funded, which means that you don't pay for any of the applications that you file with the Labor Department. You don't pay for the PERM application, unlike USCIS, where you have to pay for every application. DOL gets its fee from the Congress.
Right.
And so Congress has given it, has been giving Department of Labor its funding. So the hiring, unlike USCIS, hiring is up. There's only a 6% vacancy rate, a very low vacancy rate. But the applications, you would think that this would improve them to this would help them to improve their processing times, but they have also said that even though their hiring has gone up and they have the resources, their applications have increased 3 to 4 times. So it's always they are always playing a catch-up game. So there are
Right.
about 1,500 prevailing wage cases that are pending. And this prevailing wage is basically something that you file before you actually file the PERM or the labor cert to find out what wage you have to put for a particular position in the PERM application. So they based on the job description and the qualifications required, the Labor Department determines a wage, and that's the prevailing wage application. So that itself is taking 5 to 6 months now because they're so backlogged. So as a result of all, the backlog, we've seen processing times go up for the prevailing wage cases. It used to get approved in 4 months. Now it's taking 5 to 6 months. And also they've talked about H-2B cases. This is the seasonal worker cases. Those have gone up significantly. So as a result of which they also have backlogs. Now they've been trying to introduce new forms for prevailing wages, for the labor certification, and those forms they have told us are pending with the OMB office, and they've been pending for the last 14 months, and I guess everyone's backlogged. So
Right.
OMB is also backlogged. They have to give approval for those new forms, and they have not heard from them yet. So they're waiting to hear from them so that we can have better, more improved forms to fill out. And there were also a couple of questions that were asked to the Labor Department. One was remote work. If the person is going to be working remotely, is there any changes to the regulations with reference to posting? So an LCA, a labor condition, this is for a H1 basically. So an LCA has to be posted with in the work site. So if the person is working remote, that LCA ends up being posted, in that person's home, so which makes no sense because nobody's looking at it. So they were asking if there are any, and the Labor Department is responsible for that, for the regs that they have. So they were asking if there would be any changes in those regs, and so that the regulations are more up to date with the changing times and with remote work. But they have said, it's difficult to make any changes because change takes time and that has to go through a long process. So they've said that as of now, they are not going to make any changes with reference to the posting requirement for people who are working remotely.
Right.
Um, so there was also a question if, people are working remotely, then, the employer may not even have an office.
Right. Yeah.
So is an office required to file something with the Labor Department, to file a labor cert or to file an LCA for a H1? And headquarters they're basically saying that yes, an office is required, whether there's anyone in the office or not. But again, this is old regulation. So there has to be a headquarters, there has to be a physical brick and mortar office. So that's that. Also, there have been a lot of changes with reference to the SOC code and their new wages, prevailing wages for H1s as well as for PERMs. Every year every year the wages get revised. So the new wages kicked in in July, and DOL has started using the new SOC codes as well to determine, what is the classification of each position and what are the requirements and whether the requirements are normal or not. That whole thing is part of filing of the labor certification. If the requirements they think are not normal as per the SOC codes and the ONET, then they might ask you to submit a business necessity letter showing why you require a master's when that particular job under that code requires only a bachelor's.
Right.
So another question was, if the employers move while the prevailing wage is pending, do they have to file a new prevailing wage? And the DOL confirmed that they do. Unfortunately, even though it's taking 5 to 6 months to get the prevailing wage approved, there's no amendments.
But isn't that a lot of waiting, Ms. Reddy?
That is a huge amount of waiting. So, attorneys were asking if the prevailing wages could be amended somehow instead of being refiled if they're already pending with the Labor Department. And
Right.
Labor Department has said that they don't have that facility, and as of now, so we just have to file new prevailing wages.
Right.
Also, they have reminded us that if we have two requirements in the prevailing wage, that we have to use the requirement which has the higher salary. For example, a software engineer, we can say we will accept a person with master's +2 or bachelor's +5. So those are two alternative requirements, and the prevailing wage may be different for each. So they are reminding us that we should use the higher of the two prevailing wages when we're actually filing our PERM petition. Also, there's the Labor Department, when we're filing PERM, requires us to place advertisements, as I mentioned earlier, and if there are no responses to those advertisements, or if they don't qualify, there are no qualified responses, then you can go ahead and file the PERM application. So one of the set of advertisements required is the Sunday newspapers. So they have supposed to place in your city, whatever is the biggest newspaper, widest circulation, you're supposed to place ads for 2 Sundays, 2 consecutive Sundays.
Right.
But and in the Sunday edition of the paper. So it has been brought to their attention that there are some cities that don't have Sunday editions. So what do you do then? And they have clarified that they can just place it in the weekend edition. So it doesn't have to be just the Sunday edition. It can be like the Saturday, Sunday edition. As long as it's
weekend edition, right?
Weekend edition, as long as it's placed for 2 consecutive weekends.
Days. Okay, yes. Weekends, right?
Weekends.
Right.
Again, some more updates on what's happening with PERM or labor certification. Processing times right now, for PERM cases, they're working on November 2021 cases.
Right.
And filing is up 24%, so 24% more cases have been filed this year when compared to last year. For audit cases, meaning cases where they require additional information, they're working on September 2021 cases. So that's not too bad. Audit versus regular processing, because that's September and November, so there's about 2 months difference. Also, they've reminded us that new prevailing wages, well, this is no longer relevant because we're already in July.
Right.
All the new prevailing wages start from July, and they are valid for more than 90 days.
So it's already begun.
Yes, it's already done. So we've also heard that, and I haven't looked at it, but Appendix A is being updated, which Appendix A is basically those jobs, and it's in the DOL website. So those jobs that don't require the additional advertising. So they only require 2 Sundays, and they don't require, otherwise it's altogether 5 ads. But if you are in the Appendix A, then you don't require all those additional ads. Those jobs are basically not professional positions. So all those cases jobs which are not professional in nature, and that's decided based on whether they're in the list or not, those jobs will require less advertising, so it's easier to file the perm and cheaper as well and takes less time.
Right.
And then again, they talked a little bit about what happens when the job is in a different place or is in several different places, is in several unanticipated work locations. What happens then? Where does the advertising have to be done? Because usually
What
advertising
does
has to.
unanticipated locations mean, Ms. Reddy?
So, for example, an IT professional, if he's a consultant, might work at different places. And when you're actually filing the perm or when you give him the employment letter, you can't predict where the person will be
Right.
working. So he'll be working wherever he's needed, wherever the company has a requirement or a client.
Right.
So when you're filing a perm, you're supposed to mention the work site and you're supposed to mention and do the advertising based on which state he's going to be working in. So if he's going to be working in New York, then you have to do an advertisement in the New York Times.
Does it apply for
Working.
remote working as well, Ms. Reddy?
Yes, so if they're working remotely in New York, then you do the advertising there.
Right.
So, but again, for a lot of these IT positions, since the job location cannot be anticipated, it is unanticipated work sites. It can be anywhere in the US. The Department of Labor has reminded us that there's something called a farmer memo, something written a long time ago, and that still applies. I think that was written in 1994, but that still applies, where they say that if it's in several work locations and you don't know what the work locations are going to be, then you should do the advertisements wherever the headquarters of the company is located.
Right.
So, say you're located in New York, then you should do it from New York, even though your employee might be working in Florida for 3 months, in Atlanta for 6 months. They'll be working in different places. So,
Right.
it's appropriate in that case to do the advertising in New York. So that's
Right.
something that they reminded us about. Also, they did remind us that if the person is working remote, you have to say that in the job description that remote work, this is telecommuting is allowed or permitted, because this could be based on this, you might receive more responses to your ad or you might receive less responses. So it actually affects the job. So they tell us that whatever actually affects the job has to be mentioned in the job duties. You don't have to mention every single duty, but something that is important like telecommunicating allowed or not, remote work allowed or not, that they say should be mentioned. So remember, if you have such a situation, always mention that in the job duties. And the language is basically to the effect that telecommuting allowed or telecommuting permitted, etc. And
Right.
that should be put in the prevailing wage as well, but it's not, your case is not going to get denied because it's not put. But in general, all your documents should have the same information, and you should try to maintain uniformity.
Right.
Um, DOL has reminded us that there are about 10% of the cases are audited, but we are seeing more audits, I think, in IT companies where people are working remotely or people are working at various work locations. You see higher than 10%, I think, audits. DOL has reminded us that there are some audit triggers. So when the minimum requirement is less than a bachelor's degree, then that could be a trigger for an audit, because it's unusual for a professional job not to require a bachelor's degree. So if you're saying software engineer, 3 years of experience required, that's unusual. So that might trigger an audit. And also you'll presumably get a lot of qualified candidates for because you're not requiring a degree and only 3 years of experience. But that's again not the case, because most people have a master's, but they may not have 3 years of experience in a particular skill set. So, but that's what DOL presumes. So it could be an audit trigger if you don't require a bachelor's. Also, for example, if you require a master's but you don't require any experience, and you say that there are no resumes. So that could be a audit trigger, and that could lead to something beyond an audit, which is supervised recruitment, under which they'll ask you to place the ads again. And this time they will make sure all the resumes are going to them instead of coming to the employer, so they can keep track of it. So they'll route all the resumes to them.
Right.
So that's called supervised recruitment. So that doesn't happen that often, but it can if there are triggers, like I mentioned.
Right.
Another important update they gave us was, again, to maintain uniformity along all the forums. It doesn't have to be 100% matchy-matchy, but it should be, you should try and keep all the requirements the same, the duties the same, etc. In some instances, they might forgive not having the exact same language, but, best not to take a chance.
Right.
So that's an update to the DOL. Quickly, I know we have a few minutes left.
Right.
Update with reference to what's happening in the Biden era, where immigration is concerned. The present government is trying to is more, in some ways, pro-immigration. So, and they've also, there's so much bad press and humanitarian concerns about the previous government and how they treated asylees and refugees, and how they put them in detention centers and separated children from adults,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
There was, big news about that. So now, as an alternative to detention, if a person enters illegally, and if they think that the person might, just disappear into the country somewhere and not be traceable, instead of detaining them, they are giving them ankle monitors so that they can be traced at all times.
Right.
And also, they have they have an app called a smart app on the phone, and that's another way they can be traced. And they should always keep that turned on. And if it's not for some reason, then ICE will come, make a visit to find out what's happening.
Right.
And they're, instead of detaining the person in a detention facility, they're also going with home confinement now. So, which is better. They're more comfortable within their own homes rather than, being put in detention facilities where, a lot of the situation is sometimes not really conducive, not healthy. So we also hear about deaths in the detention center because of lack of proper medical care. So all those things happen. Also, there are a lot of bills that were passed. I mean, someone asked if immigration reform, they see there's a possibility of immigration reform, and it is possible before the end of the year. There has been a lot of movement this year. There are 6 bills apparently in the House, all towards immigration, but all are stalled right now. But there is one bill called the Innovation Act, and both the House and the Senate have passed their own version. So there's a possibility that there might be a reconciliation, so that they can bring out a new version which reconciles both the House and the Senate version, and it can be passed again.
Right. Right.
So that is the update on, I have a little more, but I think we're running out of time.
Yes, Ms. Reddy, unfortunately we are. And if you'd like, it looks like we have a lot more information to cover, so we will do that in the following episode next week.
Sure.
So thank you, Ms. Reddy. It's always a privilege hosting you. We're glad for all the information you give us and all of our viewers. And with that, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good night.
You're watching Sakshi Live. This is Thoran. Thank you.